Um, this sutta is the Adhipateyya Sutta, the three governing principles for Vipassana, for useful introspective insight. And as the title says, this speaks directly to what we're developing here, and you'll see how it follows from our previous 5 classes, and particularly dependent origination. The Buddha teaches there are 3 governing principles for the cessation of ignorance. And again, let me just qualify that. The Buddha awakened to something called dependent origination, which is the most misunderstood, misapplied teaching of all, even though most of them are. It simply states that from ignorance of 4 noble truths, all manner of confusion, delusion, and ongoing suffering, in a word, dukkha, arrives, manifests, comes into our lives. And so those 3 marks are reflected right here in this beginning teaching. There are these 3 governing principles for the cessation of ignorance. The self is a governing principle, the first thing. So rather than all those teachings that teach there's no such thing as a self, the Buddha teaches just the opposite. What he's saying is that we have views that are ignorant of what a self truly is, ignorance of 4 noble truths. So the understanding what a self is obviously a governing principle of developing this Dhamma. Just makes sense, doesn't it? And that's the central mark of those 3 marks of existence: Anicca, Anatta, the not self-characteristic, and the resulting suffering. The world is a governing principle. What is the world? The world is the world, but the world is also metaphor for our experience of impermanence. And when we cling false views to the arising and passing away of all temporary phenomena, we create what? Stress and suffering, the third one. The Dhamma is a governing principle. So where's that 3rd mark of dukkha? That's the Dhamma. The Dhamma is taught to resolve the clinging relationship of wrong views of self, clinging to all impermanent phenomena, resulting in dukkha. The Buddha teaches that awakened right view is an individual view that understands stress and suffering, understands the origination of stress and suffering, understands the cessation of stress and suffering. And all stress and suffering is the same word could be used as ignorance. And the 4th noble truth is the truth of the path leading to the cessation of suffering. That's all an aspect of profoundly developed right view. It's the whole purpose of the Buddha's teaching. And there is no other. So any teaching that you might come across or even conjure up within yourself, meaning as an adaptation to what you're learning, which is very common, by the way, is simply a speculative way of creating a self in some non-physical realm. And another way of saying that is in a trance-like state. Again, that's why the Buddha doesn't teach meditation to develop the cessation of thinking, even though that's impossible. We can trick ourselves into thinking that. That's a trance-like state. There's no possibility for useful Vipassana when we're not even aware of our own thinking. The Buddha questions, rhetorical question: how is the self a governing principle for the cessation of ignorance? A skillful disciple, having established seclusion and quiet, reflects on this. It is not for the sake of robes, alms, lodging, or future becoming that I am practicing the Dhamma, meaning you're not practicing the Dhamma for any other type of acquisition, only understanding. And it's important to remember that the Buddha, we talked a little bit about this earlier, how the Buddha is talking to people. He's talking directly to what he knows is a problem. And so this is a direct counter to what he recognized in himself and in many other spiritual seekers during his time and still common today. We're engaging in a spiritual practice to add something to a self that's lacking or to fix a self that's broken. That's all rooted in a trance-like speculative state, because the self that we think is broken or needs something in addition to what's already present is a fabricated view rooted in ignorance of 4 noble truths. The Buddha taught something completely different. And basically what he said is to look within and you'll find that you're lacking nothing. And he taught us a way to do that directly. The Buddha continues, I am afflicted by birth, sickness, aging, and death. This is an uninformed human being. The Buddha often teaches that we join with our suffering, we join with our afflictions. We go back to that. I am afflicted by birth. There's already self-identification with ordinary phenomena. Every human being is born. Along the way, they're going to get sick, they're going to age, and they're going to die. During life, we're going to get what we want, and we'll crave for that, and we'll also have aversion to not getting what we don't want. We'll have, and we'll create very powerful strategies to achieve both of those things, when in reality, that craving and that aversion is rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. It creates constant stress and constant distraction in our lives. I am afflicted by birth, by sickness, by aging, by death, by sorrows, by regret, pain, distress, and despair, overcome by stress. Perhaps the cessation of this entire mass of suffering can be known. That's the rhetorical question the Buddha's asking. That's what he set out at the age of 29 to understand. Is there a way to understand all this conflict I'm seeing in the world and within individuals in this world? What if I were to seek the same sort of sensual pleasures that I abandoned? I would lose the way. I will maintain persistence, my mindfulness refined and not confused, my body calm and not aroused, my mind well concentrated and united with my body. Another key theme of the Buddha's Dhamma is to finally unite a mind in its body and keep it there. Anytime my mind starts engaging in speculation about where I might be or what I need to get where I might be, I've lost my mind because I'm no longer in my body. That's the perfect description of a human being that's lost his mind, living in a speculated, fabricated existence. And all of that arises from ignorance of Four Noble Truths. So on the outside, we might create the most incredible, lavish, luxurious life anybody could imagine. But inside, my mind is rooted in ignorance. Inside, I'm always in a conflicted state of mind. And there's plenty of examples of that out in the world. But it's not just well-to-do people. It's anyone whose mind is rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths that would create confusion, delusion, and ongoing stress and suffering. The solution is to resolve this issue within ourselves, because that's where the issue resides. It has nothing to do with any external condition. All of those conditions are common to the human experience. It has to do with the way I experience my life. And if my mind is rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths, the only way that I can experience my life is rooted in ignorance. If I develop the Dhamma and gain that profound right view that I just talked about, then my mind remains calm and at peace no matter what's occurring. Why? Because I'm not taking anything personally. I've learned that there's nothing personal in this world. I've learned that I am in control of this self. And we're going to get deeper into what that means. But in the Adhipateyya Sutta, the Buddha describes very clearly what a self is. What is a self? What constitutes a human being? Anyway, Kevin.
The elements and the space property and consciousness.
That's why you're going to be a teacher someday. The four, earth, wind, fire, and water, the four elements, the space property, because those four elements need something to manifest within, and that sixth property of consciousness. Now, that's not some grand kind of consciousness. It's simply ongoing thinking rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. That's a human being. That's every human being. And no matter what a human being might acquire or perform in this world, they can only be those six properties. That's a human being. And when we really understand that, no matter how big a pile of gold we might be sitting on, or no matter how miserable a hut is that we have to live in, we can't change that simple fact. And understanding that at the most profound level is where peace and equanimity arises. Is that clear for everyone? Does that make sense? If we truly understand what we are? Yes?
Yes.
Again, that's the whole point of this study. It's the whole point of the Buddha's Dhamma, to understand what a self is in relation to the world it's living in. The Buddha continues, the skillful disciple, having established themselves as a governing principle, abandons what is unskillful and develops what is skillful. And what is skillful? The Eightfold Path. The skillful disciple remains well focused and pure. Excuse me. This is how a skillful disciple establishes themselves as a governing principle in ending ignorance of Four Noble Truths. Does everybody think they can do that?
Yes.
Really, there's nothing that the Buddha teaches that any normal, average human being cannot develop. It's only because of being stuck and resistant to look at our own fabrications that we can't develop the Dhamma. I had an interesting talk with Matt earlier while I was in there getting a great treatment. The people that I've taught that have had the most difficulty developing what the Buddha taught are people that have been practicing Buddhism for a long time, because they have such a conditioned and vested interest in what they've been putting a lot of effort in. And it's natural. It's a natural human condition to not want to give up something that I put a lot of effort into. And again, those are the ones that have the most difficulty in developing what a Buddha actually taught, because your mind is so conditioned towards it being something else. It's very hard to see this that way. Not impossible, but much more difficult. The Buddha continues, how is the world a governing principle for the cessation of ignorance? A skillful disciple, having established seclusion and quiet, reflects on this. It is not for the sake of robes, alms, lodging, or future becoming that I am practicing the Dhamma. I am afflicted by birth, sickness, aging, and death, by sorrows, regret, pain, distress, and despair, overcome by stress. Perhaps the cessation of this entire mass of suffering can be known. What if I were to think the same thoughts of sensual pleasures, of ill will, of harmfulness that I abandon? Beings are many in the world. There are contemplatives, Brahmins, and Devas who claim psychic powers. They can see near and far. Even so, they don't exist. I love that line. Meaning they're present in the world, but they have no useful understanding in teaching the Dhamma, as they continue to be distracted by their own sensuality, ill will, and the distraction of their magical beliefs. It's an important comment on a few things that are attributed to the Buddha that have nothing to do with what the Buddha taught or claimed to have developed within himself, such as psychic powers. And the Buddha never denied that he might have increased mental, I don't want to use it, increased mental capabilities. For instance, when the Buddha would meet someone, he had such a deep concentration in mindful presence, he immediately knew what was going on with a person. And people would take that as, well, the Buddha's clairvoyant, he could read people's minds, etc. It had nothing to do with that. And in many suttas, the Buddha said, when you start striving for these types of powers, you've lost the Dhamma. Because whether they're real or not, whether they're able to be acquired, they're only a distraction from the Dhamma. Ram had some good experiences of that in the past. But many of us have, when we've been exposed to people that are really just doing magician's tricks to try and prove how spiritually adept they are. That's a very common thing. And again, even if it's true or not, it's completely irrelevant. It has nothing to do with developing awakening right here, right now, with a mind united with its body. It's just speculation. Brahmins and Devas who claim psychic powers, they can see near and far, even so they don't exist. Even so, they would see the unskillful. The disciple, I'm sorry. They would see the unskillful disciple this way. Here is one who has taken to the Buddha's Dhamma, but they remain overcome and hurtful by unskillful mental qualities. What the Buddha is pointing out to is people that are claiming to practice the Dhamma, but aren't doing it in any legitimate, authentic way. And so other people are saying, look at this guy. He claims to be a follower of the Buddha's Dhamma, and look at how he's living his life. The skillful disciple reflects in just this manner. I will maintain persistence, my mindfulness refined and not confused, my body calm and not aroused, my mind well concentrated and united with my body. He's just talking about developing jhana meditation within the broader framework of the Eightfold Path. The skillful disciple, having established the world as a governing principle, abandons what is unskillful and develops what is skillful. The world as a governing principle, or the self as a governing principle, or as a Dhamma as a governing principle, simply means that's the central theme. That's what we are here to focus on. Nothing else. Not psychic powers, not anything that is extraneous to what the Buddha is teaching. The entire Dhamma resolves around these three marks of existence, and it resolves within the not-self characteristic.
I had a bit of trouble with the world as a governing principle. If I see it as, because there are these Brahmins and contemplatives that can see when I'm off the Dharma, is the governing principle there that I should stick to the Dharma because it would reflect badly on the Dharma if I don't, if I go by the sensualities and all that?
It's not so much that it would reflect poorly on the Dhamma, although that's a consideration for someone who's actually practicing the Dhamma. Knowing anybody that practices the Buddha Dhamma is essentially a representative of that Dhamma.
Right.
So there is a responsibility to holding yourself a certain way, but you're not capable of doing that until you develop the Dhamma. So it shouldn't, the reason why I'm saying that, it shouldn't dissuade someone that can't be the perfect Dhamma practitioner to begin with. Right. The Buddha is pointing out that you can't fool anybody. If you claim to be a Dhamma practitioner and you're acting in very unskillful ways, you're likely not. And even if contemplatives, Brahmins, Brahmas, Brahman is the Hindu god. That's what it means. Brahma is the Hindu priest, or really any priest during the Buddhist time. Simply because they might be saying you're skillful or unskillful is really irrelevant, because they have no foundation for making that judgment. Does that help clarify it a little bit? And so the world the world is really the world, but it's also a metaphor for our own ignorance, because that's where our ignorance is playing out in. There's nothing personal about the world except that we live in it. But because our minds are craving for and clinging to self-referential establishments in the world through clinging to attachment, clinging to objects, events, views, and ideas, the world now has become the stage for the playing out of my wrong beliefs.
I noticed that in the Nikaya, they use the authority as the translation for governing principle.
Yeah, and again, the metaphor, I read that too. The reason why, and a few of them had different governing principles, but they all relate to that impermanent environment that we cling to, that is rooted in ignorance. All of it. You can look at even the word authority is the authority that the world has over us because of the power we give it by thinking that we need to manipulate it in order to be happy or safe and secure. It's still all the world as ignorance of Four Noble Truth. Michael, do you have your hand up? And please, if you have your hand up and I don't call on you, just holler out, because I barely saw you. So.
Okay. Well, that's what you're talking about now, right?
Yep.
Isn't that what the Eightfold Path is? That's what it leads us back. You know, if we have a confusion in our mind as to, right action, mindfulness, don't we refer to the Eightfold Path to take away that suffering or that ignorance? Isn't that what it's there for?
Exactly. That's the whole point of the Eightfold Path, is to interrupt our ongoing process of maintaining ignorance of Four Noble Truths. When the Buddha awakened, he thought and considered for a few more weeks if he could even teach this, and then how he should go about teaching it. And he finally realized that in order to pierce the common problem of human ignorance, he needed a way to do that, to recognize and abandon it. And that's why he taught an Eightfold Path. And when you think about the brilliance of that, a mind that's rooted in ignorance requires something to recognize that ignorance, to interrupt that ongoing ignorance. Another way of saying that a mind that is deluded cannot recognize its own delusion, can it? Unless something is developed, a framework in order to recognize that. So that's why the Buddha taught an Eightfold Path as the framework and guidance for recognizing our ignorance of these three marks of existence. So great question, Michael. Thank you.
I was just thinking that with what you stated there, that the Buddha says in the beginning there that I don't practice for alms or for shelter or for future becoming, so that the world there is, or a Brahmin or a Deva or someone who could see that I'm not, if I'm caught up in practicing for powers, alms, shelter, future becoming, then I'm not really practicing.
Right.
I'm lost in the world. I'm under the authority of a deluded view
So
of the world.
yeah, so these governing principles are the reasons why I should be following the Dhamma closely.
Exactly. I mean, I think Mike really nailed it, because that the governing principle, this teaching to me is really just about Eightfold Path practice, and that the how is the self a governing principle in the Dhamma? Right speech, right action, right livelihood. You know, if we're practicing the virtuous factors and we're using the framework of the Eightfold Path, and particularly the virtuous factors of the Eightfold Path as our framework, then that the self is a fitting governing principle, because it's following right speech, right action, right livelihood. If the world is a governing principle, then right intention and right view are possible.
And the word, and I thought about that, even changing that governing, because these are all translated from the Pali and sometimes even from Pali to German to Chinese back to English. So it seemed to work, but it could also have just said the world, the self, and the Dhamma are the central themes of the Dhamma, because that's what they are. That's what governing principle. It doesn't mean it's not like there's not some action being taking place by the world or the self. It simply means, it simply is to focus us on understanding this relationship between the world, or Anicca, which is the same thing, the self, Anatta, and the Dhamma or Dukkha. The Dhamma is there to resolve Dukkha within those other two aspects. So it might be the verbiage that is making a little bit of confusion.
Yeah. So it brings us back to the three marks.
Yep.
Okay.
Another way it could say, understand that the world is a governing principle of the Dhamma. Because it is. That's where but you can look at this, it's very well focused, and it's also broad enough to encompass everything. Me and the world. There's nothing excluded, is there? And another important part of that, nothing excluded, is that we are charged as Dhamma practitioners with seeing each and every phenomena in its discreteness, not this nonsense of, maybe I shouldn't say it, not this non-Dhamma teaching of non-duality or cosmic consciousness or one mind consciousness. That's all wonderful. It's something that the Buddha didn't teach. In order to develop this understanding, we need to see the discreteness, particularly the discreteness of me. Because those other thoughts, I won't get too deep into it, those other ways of thinking is a way of clinging the self into a speculative existence. It's only rooted in ignorance. The Dhamma develops a clinging free human being. Pretty good deal, isn't it? Bonnie, did you have your hand up?
No.
Okay, thank you
No.
thank you for
No,
responding.
I was 16.
Did you have your hand up now?
No.
Okay. The skillful disciple remains well focused, and how a skillful disciple established the world as a governing principle in ending ignorance of Four Noble Truths. It's just, there's the whole Dhamma right there again. the world as a governing principle in ending ignorance of Four Noble Truths. It's a central theme. We have to consider the world from a point of view of reality, not from a speculative point of view. It's a key to understanding. Another way of saying that is understanding impermanence, understanding Anicca. How is my Dhamma a governing principle for the cessation of ignorance? The Buddha asks. A skillful disciple, having established seclusion and quiet, reflects on this. It is not for the sake of robes, alms, lodging, or future becoming that I am practicing the Dhamma. I am afflicted by birth, sickness, aging, and death, by sorrows, regret, pain, distress, and despair, overcome by stress. Perhaps the cessation of this entire mass of suffering can be known. My Dhamma is well taught by me to be developed here and now. Another important statement. It's to be practiced here and now. Not in the future, not when you've piled up enough merit, not when you feel good enough about yourself or you feel like you found the right teacher for you. Right here, right now. This is a Dhamma. The Buddha would often say, my Dhamma is good in the beginning, in the middle, and the end. What that means is it's a complete path. There's nowhere in the path where you can lose your way and not complete it. Good in the middle, good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end. It delivers, that last line means it delivers the results that an awakened human being is promising. My Dhamma is timeless. It encourages verification, something that no other Dhamma, I'm making a pretty broad and declarative statement, so I'll say most other dharmas aren't there for verification, are they? They hold their verification out as a future reward. The Buddha saw how cruel that is to mislead people that way, because it immediately takes them out of their body and keeps them there, always chasing the future reward. Or when I do this long enough and hard enough, maybe then I'll be okay. Again, the Buddha saw how cruel that type of teaching is, and he taught human beings how to develop that understanding right here, right now. My Dhamma is timeless. It encourages verification. It is entirely relevant to be directly experienced by the observant disciple for themselves. Again, this is completely experiential. Adhipateyya, come and see for yourself. No one can bestow awakening on you, but no one can keep you from it either. When I finally realized that after 600 years trying to figure out what Buddhism was all about, it literally changed everything. And I can still feel the experience I had, the visceral experience, how it felt in my body. This is up to me. This is something I can do. I'm in charge of it. What a remarkable thing, isn't it? And these teachings that the Buddha first gave 2,600 years ago are as timeless and relevant now as they were then. Skillful disciples are true companions in the well-integrated life who dwell in the well-taught Dhamma. Well-disciplined, they know that laziness and mindlessness will cause them to lose their way. The skillful disciple reflects in this manner. I will maintain persistence, my mindfulness refined and not confused, my body calm and not aroused, my mind well concentrated and united with my body. The skillful disciple, having established my Dhamma as a governing principle, abandons what is unskillful and develops what is skillful. It simply means that we focus on the Dhamma. And the Eightfold Path and the supportive suttas are designed to help us do just that. What the Buddha is also describing here is right effort. Right effort means maintaining the persistence and the structured practice, meaning the focus on the Eightfold Path to develop awakening. And it really is that simple, and I would say that easy, except because our minds are so conditioned towards ignoring our own ignorance. That's where the difficulty arises. But again, the Buddha recognized that primary problem of the nature of ignorance to ignore its own ignorance. And he gave us this Eightfold Path, as Michael described, to do just that. There's nothing magical or mystical or even miraculous in the conventional sense of the word. There's nothing miraculous about awakening. In fact, it's the most ordinary thing that any human being can do. The fact that very few actually do it, doesn't really matter when you look out on the world. We understand why the world is the way it is. Just like the Buddha said in the Bhava Sutta upon his awakening, I looked out on the world, and the world is a flame. A flame with what? A flame with the fires of passion, meaning the fires of passion are the fires of continual I-making. And I do that because my mind is rooted in wrong view. I think I always need to be getting something for myself, whether it's more because I deserve it, or more because I need to fix something, or I got to stay away from something because that's going to hurt me. All rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths, all creating stress, all creating a constant distraction, all keeping my mind outside of my body. Abandons what is unskillful and develops what is skillful. Again, what do we know is skillful? The Eightfold Path. The skillful disciple remains well-focused and pure. This is how a skillful disciple establishes my Dhamma as a governing principle in ending ignorance of Four Noble Truths. These are the three governing principles of my Dhamma. There is no secret place in the world for those doing evil. Meaning there's no way we can escape our own unskillful thoughts, words, and deeds. The skillful disciple knows whether they are well-focused or confused. How do we know? How does the skillful disciple know that we are well-focused and not confused? How do you know? What's the experience of that? How do you know you're on the right path?
Thoughts, words, and deeds are structured and guided by the Eightfold Path.
Now getting into feelings. What does it feel like?
All mud.
Yeah. That's how we know. If at any point we feel confused and stressed out, maybe frustrated, maybe angry, you might be mad at that crazy old bald guy that keeps telling you to go meditate. If you're feeling that way, you know, you're stuck in I-making, you know, you're stuck in a fabrication. That's all. The important thing is to understand we don't go further than that. We don't try to analyze what's wrong with me. Because what is that doing? That's just reinforcing that there's something wrong with you. Simply recognize that you're stuck in a fabricated view. Remind yourself, this is not me, this is not mine, this is not what I am, this is not myself. Take a breath and come back to reality. Bring your mind back into its body. And the stress will likely vanish. It might come back up in the next moment. And what do? This is not me, this is not mine, this is not myself. And as we develop our practice, rooted in concentration, the deeper our concentration is, the less our minds will be distracted by fabrications. That's how it works directly. That's why the Buddha taught meditation for that one purpose, as a counter to a mind that is distracted by its preoccupation with stress and suffering. Kevin.
I think I'm going to hand you a gold star because you just described the process of tender origination very well there. It goes no further than name and form, and that's the, you know, I just really like that you explained it. So.
I'll take the gold star.
That was really, really, really well explained right there. That's
Thank you.
The entire process happened.
And thank you for seeing that too, because this process does go no further. Stress and suffering goes no further except right here. I should say right here. I point to my heart. I don't mean that this is something that's heartfelt or anything emotional like that. Stress and suffering resides within my thinking. It's rooted in my thinking. It's rooted in my thinking that is ignorant of Four Noble Truths. Once I develop that understanding through an Eightfold Path, this now well-concentrated mind simply stops attaching itself to things. Why? Because this self knows that they're completely insignificant. It doesn't mean that I don't do the things that are necessary to maintain myself in the world. The Buddha said every human being needs food, shelter, medicine, and clothing. It's up to me to take care of that as best as I can, isn't it? But once that's done, I don't need to continually accessorize this self by continual grasping. Michael, you had a question?
I was just going to say, it's like when you recognize all those things, okay, through consciousness. You're conscious of those things that, like, the Eightfold Path is basically consciousness in every aspect. Yes?
Yes, but I would use the word refined mindfulness rather than, because it's consciousness could mean anything,
yes,
any type of thinking. The Buddha teaches the Eightfold Path rooted in concentration, so that concentration can support the refined mindfulness. Mindfulness means to recollect or to hold in mind. The refined mindfulness of holding in mind the entire Eightfold Path for our life experience, for life as life unfolds. And it doesn't mean that I need to be so rigid and, oh, am I in right intention or right view right now? As we integrate the Eightfold Path, we will naturally apply it in the way that it's meant. I think I cut you off a little bit, though.
No. So, okay, so it's refined consciousness.
I'll say refined mindfulness, but you.
Oh, okay. Okay, and once you, like, so the whole idea then is to reach a state of consciousness, refined consciousness, that you recognize that which would keep you attuned or aligned with the Eightfold Path.
Yes. Yes. Again, my only disagreement, if it's not even that, it's just the word consciousness, because that has one of the reasons why I try to avoid using that word is because of the common usage of it. From the probably the minute I was conscious of what's going on in the world, I grew up in the age of Aquarius, and we're on the verge of this new great cosmic consciousness. And a lot of people are conditioned to think that way. And maybe it's true, but to think that way is a distraction from the Buddha's Dhamma, which is not where we're going, it's where we are. So that's the important, and the Eightfold Path does just that. It keeps us right here, right now, in our bodies, in our life as our life unfolds, which is the only place where peace and happiness resides. It's the only place that the Dhamma resides. There's no Dhamma in the past, and there's no Dhamma in the future. The only Dhamma is right here, right now, at the point of contact. And we're going to get, this Saturday is a new teaching on Sariputta's analysis of the Four Noble Truths. And then next Tuesday is the analysis of the Eightfold Path, if I'm remembering this schedule correctly. And so we're going to really see how this applies in that broader but very well focused sense too, coming up in the next two classes. Thank you. The skillful disciple clearly observes in themselves that hurtful behavior hides. Again, another way of saying ignoring our own ignorance. We don't see it, we justify. I mean, how often do we might respond to someone in anger, and often our minds will immediately be justifying the anger, putting the blame on the other person or blaming the world in some way. That's a way of ignoring our own ignorance, isn't it? Not taking responsibility. The Buddha taught how human beings could take the most radical responsibility for every thought, word, and idea that occurs to it without being brutal or cruel in any way. It's a very gentle awakening, unless grasping is part of our Dhamma practice, which we quickly lose if you come here. The wise see the fool unrestrained in the world. So govern yourself with mindfulness. Govern the world with wise restraint. Beautiful words, isn't it? A self-referential ego personality, Anatta, does not want to hear that word restraint at all. It wants to establish itself in every thought, word, and idea that occurs to it. That's the constant stress of constantly craving. Every thought, word, and idea must be a self-referential thought, whether it's slightly obscured or rather obvious. And that keeps us in a speculative state. It keeps us in a trance-like state. It keeps us out of our body. Julia, did you have your hand up? Okay, sorry. Yeah, I think I better get those goggles. I'll see you, Brett. You're going to have to start telling me that you don't have your hands up.
And back to what Ram said, isn't that the reference to the world? All thoughts,
It is.
words, and deeds.
It is.
Yeah.
It's all the world. It's as a society, we've become conditioned to want to see the world in one way. In fact, the idea, I don't want to get too deep into this, the idea of positive thinking as a resolution to the world's problems seemed to take hold during my childhood. I remember my mother listened to a guy called Carlton Fredericks on WOR radio every day. The power of positive thinking. again, many people, pardon me?
My mom too.
Yeah.
My mom.
I mean, it was,
On Saturday.
and yeah, he wasn't the only, that was a movement that's still in place today. In fact, a lot of so-called spiritual teachings really are the power of positive thinking, looking at things in this only one way. That contradicts a little bit what the Buddha said. Dukkha occurs, doesn't it? And the primary focus is to understand the nature of suffering, not ignore it by insisting that everything is positive and everything is wonderful, because the world isn't. The Buddha's Dhamma teaches us to see reality. There's wonderful things. And I can tell you, I've never had more appreciation for my moment by moment life now at 64 with a broken down body and barely able to see than I ever did. Because each moment is so meaningful, no matter what the experience of it is. It's simply an aspect of being free of the need for anything else to be any different than it is. And that way, we're mindfully present with life as life unfolds. And that makes every moment meaningful, no matter what it is. Whether it's another, ridiculous political nonsense, or this guy's doing that, or something happens to me, or whatever it might be. It's completely impersonal. So what? So what? It's not positive, it's not negative. But in this way, we see the world clearly. We're not expecting that a world that can't provide any permanent resolution to my ignorance, except if I fabricate a way of looking at the world, such as, such as the world is all positive, the world is all good, or that if I just suffer gladly within this world in a future lifetime, maybe 1,000,000 lifetimes from now, then I'll get a reward for that. Again, the Buddha saw those types of teachings that need to see everything. This was common during the Buddhist time. This idea of positive thinking didn't just come up with Carlton Fredericks. It was common during the Buddhist time in different manifestations, such as the need to develop speculative, magical, and mystical realms, because this realm sucks. So let's create another one that's more acceptable, that I can establish myself in, which is what we do. And we do it compulsively and gleefully. I did it for many years, even though there was when I was told that awakening is going to take endless eons, but keep going. I kept going, but I think, wow, what am I doing this for? Because somebody instilled in me, I bought into it, the hope that if I keep doing what I'm doing, my chanting and my bowing and the visualizations and all the other worshiping stuff, this is at least maybe in a couple zillion years, I'll be okay then. Imagine that way of thinking. That's how I thought for so many years. Does everybody see the cruelty in that belief? And I'm not blaming anyone. My teachers, I had some of the most world-renowned teachers. Not all of them were, but a few of them were. And they were completely sincere on what they were teaching, but they had no idea what they were teaching either. That's the problem. And we don't have to look any further than right here in these three governing principles. Michael, did you have your hand up again?
Well, then you wouldn't be present. And in what you were saying there, like if someone's promising, or you were thinking that you were going to be better in so many years, sometime in the future, then you're not present here then.
Exactly. My mind is out of my body. I am stuck in that fabrication and speculative realm that I created. Nobody else did it to me. When I started dreaming about those, the endless eons in the future, it's because I bought into it. I bought into it because of my own ignorance. The fact that somebody else was teaching that and calling it Buddhism is almost irrelevant, except it needs to be noted. This is what the Buddha spent, you'll hear me say this if you keep coming, the Buddha spent nearly as much time teaching what his Dhamma wasn't as teaching what it is. Let me continue. Establishing jhana. Jhana means concentration. Jhana is the Buddha's word for meditation. Establishing jhana, established with a well-concentrated mind, governed by my Dhamma, by the Eightfold Path, in thought, word, and deed, follow my Dhamma. The sage who is engaged in right effort in developing their understanding of Four Noble Truths will not lose their way. The skillful disciple conquers Mara. Mara is a common metaphor for Mara is the malevolent God Mara. And as we understand the Buddha's teaching, the use of metaphor is to describe a certain quality of mind. Mara is metaphor for the world, for ignorance, for an ongoing conflicted mind. The skillful disciple conquers Mara. There is no further becoming. The skillful disciple understands the world, a sage free of ignorance of themselves and the world. That's the end of the sutta. The whole Dhamma is right there, free of ignorance of themselves and the world. Nick.
Okay. With this. So I want to make a plan, but the world is impermanent, and why should I bother? Because it may or may not come to pass. And I'm thinking about that, and I said, well, no, that's not. You still need to make a plan. You still say, oh, I'm going to go make an appointment with the doctor, or I'm going to do this, or whatever. I'm going to go to the store.
Yep.
And you get to the store, and the store is closed. Okay. It's the acceptance of the fact that the store is closed.
Yeah.
Like I'm right here standing in front of it. I know the store is closed. The store is closed.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't be stressed out by the fact that the store is closed.
What would make you stressed out that the store was closed?
The stress would say, okay.
Why? No. Why? Where would the stress come from? What originates it?
The stress would come from me, and it would be saying, why did this happen to me?
Yep.
Why is
That's it. That's the Dhamma.
Why is the store?
Yep. You're taking it personal. When there could be all kinds of reasons why the store closed. In fact, if the store owner knew that you were coming and they didn't want to see you and they closed the store, it's still not personal, is it? There's nothing personal in that. It all occurred in the store owner's mind. And the same thing with the doctor. You make a doctor appointment and you got to get there because you're really sick, and you show up and the doctor's sick. He didn't get sick because of you. So you bring up such a good point. Nothing personal, especially the things that we think are personal, especially the things that we think are exceptions to the rule that nothing's personal. Those are the ones you really better look at, because they're the ones that are going to get you. But thank you for a great question. Let's go around the room. Hello, Matt.
John, good to see you. Thank you for your teaching. Noble silence.
Glad you're here. Lorna.
Thank you for your teaching. I'll switch in noble silence, please.
Glad you're here. Jeez, whoever left everybody speechless. Good evening, Kevin.
Good evening, John. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for asking.
I'm well, and I'm going to sit in noble silence.
Uh-oh. We got something going on here. Hello, Ram.
Oh boy, it's my turn.
Oh, that's fresh.
I'm going to have to read this one a few more times. Actually, what I missed in reading it the first time, and actually even in listening to you, was this is again about the 3 months.
Yep.
And hasn't quite clicked in yet. Yeah, that's all I have to.
Yeah, it will. It'll
Yeah.
become clear. Julie, I understand you don't have to say anything. And nobody except Lorna has to talk, and she didn't. Feel free to pass, but we'd love to hear what you have to say.
I appreciate your teaching. Thank you. And I also appreciate that I have quite a bit of catching up to do. I can see that, but I guess that's it. Thank you.
Welcome. Do you know the key to catching up?
What is the key?
Be very gentle with yourself.
That's
It's the key to the Dhamma.
That's my Mara.
Good. Like I said, the 5 talks are up there now. The 6 will be up there. Have you been to my website, becoming-buddha.com?
I only briefly to make sure I knew the address.
Okay, so you know how to
So
get
I
to
didn't
it.
really look at it.
Okay, on the home page, just scroll down. You'll see Vipassana Structured Study. They're all there, and like I said, they're also on YouTube, Podbean, and iTunes. And there's also don't get too complicated. And also on the home page at the top, you'll see guided jhana meditations, And there's 5-minute to 45-minute guided meditations recorded that you can listen to get you reacquainted. How long do you normally meditate for if you have a regular practice?
20 to 30 minutes.
That's plenty. That's plenty. In fact, I would say keep it to 20 or 30 until you really feel comfortable with this new practice if you're going to develop it. That really is plenty. There's more to just meditation, like we said here, being part of a sangha. The Buddha often said the most important part of the Dhamma is being part of a sangha, or I should say
Right,
developing
and
a
I
sangha.
agree that, which is why I think I didn't want to, because they were really just meditation and no real discussion and no, so the discussion I appreciate very much.
Yeah. Oh, it is. The discussion is at least as important as the direct teachings. You know, I think we'd all agree with that. It really is. Since this is the first time here, you don't really have the perspective on this. But what has developed here in Frenchtown and a little bit online is really remarkable. I've been around this for a long time, and I've never been part of a well-focused sangha like this one. It really is remarkable, and you all deserve credit for that, not just your fantastic teacher. Hello, Helen.
Hello, Helen. I guess the point that that I passed through when we were talking about this at dinner tonight was that moment when something awful has happened and you do wish that things were different. And then the next step is accepting that they won't be and that they aren't. But do you ever really get past that point of wishing something horrible didn't happen?
Yes, I'm glad you asked. And I mean, it's just from my own personal experience, yes. And it really does change everything. Even out in the world, but also I had 2 sisters and a father die in the past year, and they're all 3 of them were like rather lengthy illnesses, and especially when my father just passed a couple weeks ago, it was such an incredibly profound. Oh, thank you. And it was very sad, but he was 101 years old too. And not that I didn't mean to giggle, and not that it should have happened just because he was 101. It was expected, so it wasn't sudden. But, and I hadn't seen him for a couple of weeks. I didn't want to get into this too deep, so I won't tell too long a story. I hadn't seen him in a couple of weeks. And so when I walked into the funeral home and he's sitting in a coffin, and I looked at him, I was telling Matt this. It was kind of like they tell you when you die, when just before you die, you have this life review. It was like that when I saw him. It was like every wonderful thing we had between us was just part of my thinking then. It was, I don't even know how to describe that. It was just this incredible appreciation for this man. And that's all. It wasn't, there was no thoughts of loss or panic or who could do this and why, and or even getting into, maybe he wasn't getting the best care, any of that. It was just this incredible appreciation for this wonderful man. That's it. To me, that's remarkable. I think I was also telling Matt, and I thought back on when I was 14 or 15, and the first time I went to a funeral, which happened to be in the same church my father's was, and I walked in and I saw the casket with a body in it. And it was so horrible to see. I was so full of fear. And one of my thoughts, even back then when I was 14 or 15, is I'm going to have to see my parents in that box. And I think that's kind of normal. I think people, maybe not. But when it, 50 years later, it was just what it was. I'm not going to say it was wonderful, except that it was. But and then other things have happened. I do listen to the news about once a week, and sometimes I catch it on a really busy cycle, and I hear about mass shootings. They're awful to hear. But I don't immediately have to hate the shooter, or hate people that have guns, or hate people that don't. It's just the sadness of what's occurring in the world. Suffering occurs. The Buddha taught us that. And to immediately go into who's to blame and why we should blame and who to hate, I've lost my mind if I do that, don't I? So you asked the question, wait, what do you ever get there? Yes. We can,
You don't have that feeling of wishing that those people didn't die that way?
No, no wishing, no. An acknowledgement of the brutality of human life. But you know, that's because I'm not stuck in a positive way of only seeing things in a positive way. Looking at the what happened in the northern Bahamas, it's astonishing, the destruction, the loss of life there. Part of dukkha. That doesn't. I'm not happy about it, but I'm not sad about it. It's just what occurs. One of the profound things that the Buddha teaches is to understand this. We live in a world, the world, that is prone to things like massive hurricanes and tornadoes and people shooting other people just because they do it. Or maybe go down the whole list. Dukkha occurs. But we develop a way to reclaim our mind so we don't have to lose it when these terrible things occur. And we also don't have to lose it, by the way, when wonderful things occur. I don't have to attach myself to them. I don't need more of it. I can be happy with one piece of chocolate cake. I'm not quite there yet. But yeah, so this isn't theory or speculation. And I know that's not what your question wasn't asking it in that way. This is how awakened human beings experience their life. And I would bet, and in fact, even though Julie's new and Michael and Julia are relatively new, I would bet you all have had at least some experience of that, of experiencing things that would have normally turned you around and it doesn't. Is that true?
Yes.
Isn't that remarkable? That's a sign that you're regaining control of your mind, which is the whole point of this, isn't it? The Buddha teaches we gain the ability to think what we want to think when we want to think it, which means that each and every thought at that point is an appropriate thought. When you hear your dad died, you feel sad, but you don't lose your mind over it. When you hear probably thousands of people have got killed in a hurricane, you understand it. I mean, and it's not to say that I don't feel the pain and feel the suffering.
You're just not attached to it.
Yeah, and at times it's almost overwhelming. But again, there's no need for it. It should be overwhelming. When we hear of 1,000 human beings that just lost their lives over the course of a day, it should feel bad. But the next thought shouldn't be what happened. And I heard something there that because I listened to it now because I'm kind of conditioned towards it. A few people saying it's an act of God. When that tsunami hit Japan, I'll never forget it. One of the, I don't remember who it was, said that happened. It hit Japan because there's so many gay people there. It was an act of God.
Yeah, that's what they said about AIDS.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's how people think. They have to put a blame on something because it's so horrendous to just say this is what happened. But this is what happened. Yeah, I mean, I grew up in the beginning of the AIDS epidemic. It's one of the reasons why I got a minister's license so I could go into hospitals legally and talk to people, because in the beginning of the AIDS crisis, they quarantined whole wings of hospitals. Nobody could go in and see them. These poor people, the thing they missed the most wasn't health. It was a human being to sit down and talk to them. And each and every one thanked me for that reason. And I still remember how so many people just saying, do you really want to be in this room? They were afraid of their own disease. Dukkha occurs. What a remarkable thing to really understand that.
Another aspect of when something so-called horrific happens is that we have this immediate urge to go fix it.
Yep.
We've got to go fix it because this is not good. And I've noticed in myself that when these shootings happen and I've lost that urge, or even feeling guilty about not wanting to fix it. That disappearing.
Yeah, that's a sign of a well-controlled mind. And that doesn't mean, doesn't mean you don't do anything about things. Because your mind is well concentrated, you know what you can do and what you can't do, what's actually going to do something. And engaging in constant political rhetoric is no solution, is it? And also we understand as Dhamma practitioners, we need to live in a world of laws. We're simply not yet there as a society where we don't need laws and people to enforce the laws. But we also understand that legislation is not going to wipe out ignorance. Legislation is not going to wipe out ignorance. So if we understand that, we might work towards something with a more meaningful solution. Thank you for bringing that up. Katie, good to see you.
Good to see you. That was a really good question. I'm really glad you asked that because that's
Me
what
too.
I have struggled with too. So that's all I have. I'll take no more time.
Thank you, Kate. Julia, good to see you tonight.
Good to see you too, John. I wrote something down that I thought was like useful. It's about this that you said. You said the skillful disciple remains pure, well-focused, and not confused. And peace is how the disciple knows he is focused and not confused. And you said, this is not mine, this is not me, this is not myself, and this is not mine. And I thought if this is something I could remember for like at times when I do lose my mind and do lose my concentration and interacting with others, this is very helpful. I think this keeps you focused on the eightfold path.
Absolutely. That is, thank you. That is the key teaching of the Dhamma. That's the resolution. Nothing is mine. Nothing is me. Nothing is not. And if you want to send me an email to remind you, there's a sutta that I use often, especially on retreat, called the Mindfulness of Bahia. If you just did a search on Bahiya, you'd come across that. It's a very short sutta where the Buddha teaches Bahia, who is impatient to learn the Dhamma, basically that. This is not me, this is not mine. And you'll hear that often here too. So thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Michael, good to see you.
Good to see you, John. Thank you for the clarity on everything. It really helped me see things.
Oh, good.
Noble silence. I've said enough.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Bonnie, good to see you.
You know, in line with what people are talking about with Helen is raising, I think, trying to accept life as life occurs has been a challenge when it's like you're in the middle of a storm, like things hit you and maybe it's, you know, in the wind because I'm here, but so I'm struggling and trying to practice being as close to the contact of really feeling like I think I'm writing myself quicker. And I'm using the Eightfold Path and reminders as well as being here and friendships who are also practicing. But for me, it still doesn't mean that because I might be aware or skillfully viewing or minding all of my Eightfold Path, I still feel things, and so to try to see them more clearly and then go and sort of and then I end up seeing my choices that in fact where I think I don't have choices I really do choose differently. I mean, doesn't mean that choose is going to be easier because I don't think even though there's this simple framework, it's still hard to be present with it when I can see what I need to let go of, but it's like a dog with a bone. It's like, it's okay, you can put it down, but it's almost like, not yet. Okay. I don't know.
That's mine. This is me. This is what I am.
And being clear about what is mine and what I can do still I think growth is sometimes painful or hard, but it's the benefits are there, I think.
Thank you. the Buddha teaches, the Dhamma teaches that impermanence is stressful, including an ever-changing self, isn't it? Especially when we're trying to hang on to certain things and get into a new way of thinking. You could almost call feelings a fourth governing principle, because that's where in about 10 weeks, I think, we're going to, maybe longer, one of the new suttas is the Maha Dukkha Sutta, the greater discourse on stress and suffering. And in that sutta, the Buddha focuses on the allure and the drawbacks of feelings, but in a way that relates to both someone who is uninformed and to one, a skillful disciple who's developed it, which obviously once we develop that profound understanding, there is no allure or drawbacks to feelings. They're just feelings. Kind of what I just described when I saw my dad in the coffin. It's just, and it's a feeling that we don't need to describe anymore. Again, it's what's occurring right now. So we are, a mind united in its body still has the sixth sense base, the five physical senses and the sixth sense of thinking. And so it's still interpreting and processing reality through those senses. But when those senses no longer have a mind of their own, you know, the Buddha talks about eye consciousness, ear consciousness, etc. When my senses no longer have a mind of their own because of my well-concentrated mind, simply what's occurring. So we don't lose the ability to feel. In fact, I would say we feel more deeply than we ever have before, but we don't react to our feelings either. Thank you, Bonnie. Liz, good to see you.
Good to be here. I think that the idea of the well-concentrated mind and that question that you ask yourself is, what is the condition of my mind? That is something that pulls us back in the moment, and we can make adjustments from that point. So I think that's, for me, one of the most helpful things is I can now recognize when I'm getting anxious or upset about something, and then I can ask myself, what is the condition of your mind? And, you know, if you've allowed yourself to sort of go off the track and build that steam that feeds the squirrels, you know. And just check yourself and ask yourself, what's the condition of your mind? And even at that moment, if you could just stop and then take a breath in that moment, it's just a really powerful tool. So I'm just so grateful I have that. Thank you, John.
I am too. Thank you, Liz. Nick, good to see you tonight.
See you. I have one question. Is there a time when it's all right for the body to be aroused?
Yeah. I would say if your mind is united in your body and you're not self-identifying with your arousal, you're good to go. It's difficult though, isn't it? And I think it depends on the kind of arousal we're talking about, but none of it should be taken personally. And if it's not, in that way, it won't contribute to any further suffering. But if it is, we're in trouble. You know, and again, we've taken that to extreme. There's people that do extreme things because of the initial feeling of arousal isn't being fulfilled by ordinary means. In other words, they take it. So we can lose our minds over that. But again, in the well-concentrated person with refined mindfulness, there's arousal, but it's not taken personally, just like there is any other feeling. What do you think of that answer, Nick?
I feel like that's a disconnection.
Where?
Okay, so you're attracted to someone. A physical attraction. That sounds like it shouldn't happen.
Well, two things. One, we're householders. We're not monastic. We're householders. We're not monastics.
Yeah, unless you took vows of celibacy, that there's nothing wrong with that.
There's a whole different set of rules for that. But to speak to that, there's also in the Anapanasati Sutta, it says, I breathe in sensitive to pleasure. I breathe out sensitive to pleasure. I breathe in sensitive to not pleasure. I breathe out sensitive to not pleasure. So there's nothing, pleasure arises, pleasure passes away. I'm aware that I'm not aroused.
And
I'm aware that I'm aroused. There's nothing wrong with arousal or not arousal.
It's what we do with it. And what you're, if you're preoccupied with it. Pardon me?
Don't take what isn't freely.
Yeah. No, that's a strong part of any healthy relationship, isn't it? I mean, when I get into talking, maybe counseling in this way, I say that, so now I think we're talking about sex, right? That the best sex is when both parties are giving and not taking. And that takes a selfless way of doing that, doesn't it? Some people can't even imagine that. I think we can here. But that's what we're talking about. So there's nothing that is not hurtful, that is excluded from an awakened human being's experience. We are human beings. We're simply awakened human beings. And as Matt was saying, unless there's some reason to take a vow of celibacy, you can get aroused all you want as long as you don't take it personally. Great question. I think that's it. What a great class. What do I have an announcement? Our retreat is 5 weeks away. So if you're going, sign up, get your room. I hope you do join us. It's going to be a little bit different retreat than the one we had in the spring. A little bit. More focus on the Heartwood of the Dhamma. That's why it's called the Heartwood of the Dhamma retreat, I think. So we'll finish with metta as we always do. So find your relaxed meditation posture. And take a moment to become mindful of your in-breath and your out-breath. And these are the Buddha's words on metta from the Karaniya Metta Sutta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing and gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short, or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. Radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. Thank you all for a wonderful class tonight. Peace.